Well, thank you very much. I'm just delighted to be here today. I brought with me, as I was packing my suitcase, I found on my desk an article from one of my favorite magazines in the United States. The magazine is the American Thinker. And the headline here, I'm sorry you probably can't see it from there, but the headline is, "Will Estonia Liberate the United States?" I think the answer probably is yes. I certainly hope so. Certainly here in Estonia over the past 2 decades, you've made remarkable progress. You've had truly a revolution in your society, and I think you have a lot to teach the rest of the world, including the United States of America. And that teaching's not just about what policies are best in the economic or political sphere, but it's also teaching in the inspiration that you provide to us. When you give us examples of political courage or farsightedness and determination, I think those can be just as important sometimes as the actual policies you adopt. And I guarantee you we're going to need all of that in the months and years ahead. Now, I want to talk to you today. I'm going to pick up just briefly where we were this morning with a couple of world crises. The first we heard a lot about this morning was the global liquidity crisis. I'm going to mention another one as well in a minute. And what these two crises have in common is that they're both going to inspire a lot of pressure for governments to take action. And those actions that are proposed are going to threaten our freedom and our prosperity. The first one, as I said, is the global liquidity crisis. Began really only a couple of months ago. I hope we all remember how recent this crisis really is. We had a lot of discussion this morning about the causes. I think we had in the United States a bubble in the housing market. We heard about that this morning. Prices rose faster than market conditions would normally allow. We had that artificially high demand generated by interest rates that were held too low by our government, and by pressure from our Congress, again, our government, to extend home ownership among lower income Americans. There was also this problem of derivatives, complex derivatives of mortgages that helped disguise the level of risk that was involved in some of these assets. And that caused people and institutions to lose confidence that they actually knew the prices, the appropriate prices for these financial instruments. And because of that loss of confidence in the knowledge of the real price, no one will buy, no one will lend. The credit markets have frozen and the stock markets have fallen. And in this globalized, linked world we live in, a credit freeze like that in the United States extends to all other countries as well. Now, that loss of confidence, I want to emphasize, is a loss of confidence that the prices of the assets reflect their real value. Now, we have a mechanism for determining real prices. It's the free market. It's the only mechanism we know of that actually determines accurate prices. And the free market is in the process right now of establishing real prices for these assets in the financial marketplace. And when that price setting process is done, this crisis will be over. And if you know nothing about economics, other than that you need a free market to establish accurate prices for goods and services, well, then I think you probably know enough. And if you will remember that you need a free market to establish real prices in times of crisis, if you'll remember that in times of crisis, then you'll do better than politicians or economists who will try to tell you otherwise. Now, the second crisis, this one's a little bit in the future, and I'm not going to talk for a long time about it. But this is the crisis that's going to be caused by government actions to lower energy use in response to fears about global warming. Now, notice that I didn't say the future crisis was going to be caused by global warming. The future crisis is going to be caused by the government actions that are going to be proposed to deal with global warming. Global warming's been presented to us in terms that are usually reserved for a religious experience more than government policy making. We have visions in my country, at least, of apocalyptic floods, mass extinctions of species, and this issue is talked about in terms that I really can't describe in any way other than hysteria. Now, I'm not going to argue about the pros and cons or the yeses or nos of climate change today. However bad its effects might be, however, on our economies, and I hope we won't assume that the worst case scenarios are the ones that are true. Well, however bad those actual effects from climate change are, they're nothing like the havoc that is going to be wrought on our economic activity and well-being by government attempts to reduce our energy use. Energy is the lifeblood of economic activity, and it will be quite easy for governments to take actions that will set us back not into the kind of mild recession we're heading into right now, but into a depression that would take decades or even centuries for us to recover from. Climate change, of course, itself will occur over decades, and adaptation is a real possibility. Adaptation can be almost cost-free if it happens over a time span that's long enough, because we're constantly rebuilding our economies and our cities in any case. So I hope that's an option that you will keep in mind. Energy curtailment, by contrast, if it's mandated by governments, happens very fast and has effects that are immediate and potentially catastrophic. Well, in both of these crises, the short-term credit liquidity crisis that I hope we're starting to come out of even now, and the longer-term crisis of energy curtailment to address climate change. The main threat to our well-being is not that governments will do too little, but rather that governments will do too much. That they will take actions that stifle initiative, stifle entrepreneurship, and reduce overall levels of economic activity. It's sad to say, but as often as not, governments seem likely to cause or exacerbate problems rather than make them better. And here I must say I differ a little bit with our panelists this morning. I don't know if you noticed, but I noticed that every one of them, while they were in part decrying the idea of government action, every one of them at some point said, of course the government must act now. Every one of them said that. And I have to tell you, I simply don't agree with that. I'm watching the actions that my government in the United States is taking, and I think that those actions are, in fact, making the crisis worse rather than better. They're extending the length of time that it takes for us to get to the point where we know what the real prices are of these assets and investments in the market, what the real value is of a Lehman Brothers or a Bear Stearns or whoever is out there in the marketplace. If we let the market act, it will set those prices for us very quickly, and we'll know where we are. And once we know where we are, then we can start again to invest ourselves and our resources in economic activity, and we'll be out of this crisis definitely.